It's great to be here, and I'm really honored to be the moderator today. We're really lucky to have this very accomplished and color coordinated, look at this, panel. It's just beautiful. These are accomplished professionals who have a wide range of experience monitoring, protecting, sharing, and measuring reputation for the organizations whose reputations are entrusted to them each and every day. So we're going to be talking to them about social media and the implications of managing a reputation and how you go about listening, communicating, engaging, and reacting to things in real times in our digital world. And you're in it, I'm in it, they're in it, so we want to make this really engaging as possible. So you've heard everybody here, you've read their bios, that's why you're here, and we're going to jump right in, sort of as a presidential panel discussion as well. And I'll start with Mark. We're going to take this in 3 sections, actually. First, we're going to talk about getting it right on social, and then we're going to move to identifying risks and how we do that, and then we're going to go into talking about managing crisis when it hits the fan. What should we do in that particular case? So we're going to start with Mark. And your position, you've actually worked with many organizations to get it right on social. So how has social changed the way that companies are telling their stories?
Well, I think, first and foremost, it has required companies to be involved and responsive and not just try to push communications, but actually engage in a regular basis with their stakeholders.
And I think, in fact, last night I was teaching a class, I said, it's the E word, everyone, engagement. And that's really a key thing. Alberto, what do you think about that? How has social media sort of changed the landscape?
Yeah, I think it certainly has made us a lot busier. So any communicator in the room can probably would sympathize and agree with that, right? So it's not just that you have to do all the traditional stuff that you would typically have to do, but today we have to do a lot more. Now that's a blessing and a curse, I would say, right? Because as communicators, we've never had this many tools at our disposal. That's the great part. The challenge, I would say, is you got to move quick, but you still have to be smart. And I think therein lies the risk and the fun, I think, for a lot of us.
Right. And Tricia, you too. We've talked about a little bit about that as well, right? About the changes.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an immediacy that everyone has mentioned, that you really need to respond quickly. You also need to get your story out quickly. You want to be the first to tell it. So being on the ball and communicating across your organization to know what's happening, I think has been a real challenge. But the plus side of that is there's really a lot of room for kind of micro stories that wouldn't have warranted a news release or an interview with a reporter. But all those little great things that the company does that you can publish on a daily, hourly basis.
Now, one of the things that it's really clear is that when we talk about engagement too, we talk about how we engage with media. And so, Cheryl and John, maybe I'll ask you that question is, what kind of content is really needed to stand out to reporters, and how has it changed our relationship with that very important public?
So I think social has changed, and I agree with everyone here. I think communicators now aren't just creating the content, so we're not just the communicators, but we're facilitating the communications too, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of, so on the McDonald side, it's not just us telling, okay, what we want to tell about a promotion or what we want to tell our stories, but how do you monitor what people are saying so they are telling your story? So I think it's facilitating communication, not always being the one to be proactively telling our story. And I think that's the challenge for a lot of us, because we always feel like we need to be in the driver's seat of like, we need to say it, we need to say it. Sometimes it's okay to step back and see what conversations are happening and facilitate it more so it's more organic for them. And I think that goes back to the media side too, that they'll pick up on things and it's easier for a reporter to say, okay, that story is going on by this group of folks that find this interesting. Versus us proactively pitching. I think that's the dynamic has changed.
If I could just add,
yeah,
I think, keep in mind too that reporters are facing the same challenge in terms of the volume of content and the speed at which content is pushed out, right? So the more you can do to help them be able to tell a story and tell it quickly, I think will be helpful.
And do you feel like the partnerships have gotten closer through with reporters because of social?
I wouldn't say,
you go ahead.
I wouldn't say directly through social in every case, but partly because social is driving that. We have probably more interaction with reporters and more engagement with them because they've got this beast to feed of their Twitter account and their website. So I think it has enhanced our relationship with them in that way.
Great. John, let's hear too from you. Who do you think is doing it right? Or you don't have to keep names private. You don't have to call on anybody else. But are there situations or sort of cases you think that, wow, that they really have gotten this right?
You know, I tend to look at it
That's a
from
question we're going to ask everybody.
Sure.
So.
I tend to look at it from a crisis perspective. So, you know, normally my clients are calling or we're working with them when something is happening that they did not expect. You know, there are some misconceptions about how you use social. One is that managing online reputation is something that you have to do online. You know, we constantly see organizations that are focusing on the crisis and what's happening on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and everywhere else, and then being blindsided by what's happening in other places. Couple of examples. I tend not to talk about organizations that are doing it right or wrong. There are just gradations of good or bad because there's no real science to it. A lot of it's gut instinct. A couple weeks ago, DiGiorno Pizza had an episode with a very poorly timed use of a misunderstood to them hashtag. Now, they got it right at the start because I think everyone who saw their response had a feeling that they were hearing a genuine apology from a genuine human being who recognized he had made the mistake. Where they went wrong on that, however, is that they kept apologizing. They didn't know where to stop. And you know, managing reputation online, especially in a crisis, it's even more important to know when to stop than to know when to start.
It's a very important point for everybody in this room. Somebody else want to weigh in that about particularly people that, organizations that you really think are doing it right, or a case when that happened?
I don't know if it's a case, but just because I'm a news junkie, I was watching the news this morning. I think that's one of the things we have to remember with social. Different than if you got a story in the New York Daily News from years ago or you're on TV, social allows us to have or create relationships with our customers, right? So we can get Twitter followers and constantly communicate with them, and you hope that the content you're pushing out will keep sucking them back in. So now there's this ongoing relationship. It's not just go one and done transactional, you read a story in a paper and you're finished. With a Twitter feed, you want them to keep coming back. I just saw on CBS News that they just started their own YouTube channel. CBS News New York has a new YouTube channel, so people can see past stories and things about their anchors and just popular stories of the day. And I thought, well, you know, that's really interesting, because if you think about what really makes a difference between Channel 2, Channel 4, ABC, NBC, news is commoditized, right? So the more social content they can push out there to create relationships with their customers or with their viewers, I think at the end of the day, that's what social is about. It's not, yes, it's telling our story, but that's not the end goal. The end goal is creating this relationship so they want to keep coming back. So again, that's just an example I thought about CBS this morning. They just started this YouTube channel, like, oh, that's really interesting to create a relationship with viewers, because again, what's the difference between one newscast and another?
And that whole transparency issue, and when in my new role in national security studies, you know, watching how it's happening on the national front with organizations that have to keep us safe. And when NYPD got in that trouble because they asked people to tweet pictures of officers, and then they got back some pictures they didn't really want to see. I thought the way that they handled that was, first of all, very New York-y, but also very transparent. And they said, hey, we're new to this. We're going to have some bumps in the road. We're not coming off Twitter. And we want to engage. So part of it is really when you hit, engaging is also, when you have relationships, it's also acknowledging when you kind of, all right, we screwed up on that. And that's very new for PR folks. And you really have to do that if you're going to be genuine in your engagement. Why don't we shift a little bit here, because part of engaging and part of everything we do is monitoring what's out there and monitoring those risks and making sure that we're aware of what's happening, which is pretty tough because now we have to monitor more stuff. Alberto, can you talk a little bit about the processes you might have in place for monitoring social dialogue and discourse?
Yeah, so I will say that there's, while we're very fortunate, there's no silver bullet here. And I say we're fortunate because we have a central business intelligence group, a very fancy name, right? But that is somewhere in this building. And what they do is they monitor the voice of the customer, they monitor social conversations that are relevant to our business, and they provide both, macro, real-time views, but they can also provide deeper understanding down the road should we need it. But that does not take the place of our own communications team, what I'll call a little bit of digital shoe leather, being out there themselves and really looking into keeping tabs over your influencers, what's the conversations that may be relevant. Like Cheryll just said, you're a news junkie, right? That's good. That's information and knowledge that you can bring into the business that we wouldn't necessarily capture, from a central business group, right? And so I think that digital shoe leather is really alive and well in the team and something we're encouraging to really have your finger on the pulse because you have to be engaged. And that does not just mean a corporate Twitter handle, but that's us as individuals have to be engaged on multiple platforms. We have to be where our people are, basically.
Yeah, and Tricia, too, when you talk about monitoring, can you talk a little bit about Alberto talks about engagement versus views, and then how do then I'm going to ask Mark too about that question.
Sure.
So monitoring and how you differentiate, and then how you communicate that it's not just numbers of views, that engagement. We're always trying to get our management to understand that, and our clients to say, look at the engagement here.
Right. Well, JCP&L's business is a little bit different because we're not out there actively trying to sell our product to people. They buy our product every time they turn the lights on. So for us, social is a very important tool, and we are monitoring it hourly. I'd say constantly, actually, but a lot of us get hourly alerts as to what our customers are saying on social. So we view that 24/7. And then, of course, we have people sitting in front of monitors looking at Hootsuite screens, understanding exactly what the comments are coming in. So for us, I'd say the balance, engagement versus views, it really depends on the issue, on the customer, on the moment. We want people to be aware of our social media accounts. We want them to know how to reach us when they need us. But if they're not a social media person, that's okay too. We've got lots of other ways to get in touch with your electric company. So we want to be there. We want to tell our story. We want people to know the good things that we're doing, to know how to reach us if their power goes out, if they have a billing issue, whatever the case may be. But I think we're a different animal in a lot of ways when it comes to social because we're not out there trying to, get everybody to engage with us on a daily basis. We understand that it might not be the most interesting, business that you deal with. It's just one of the most vital.
Except when
the
Sandy
power's
hits,
out,
and then
right,
we all are
exactly.
trying to find out what's going on with you on
extremely
Twitter.
interesting to everybody. Right. That's the thing. We're doing work every day to ensure reliable power. We want to communicate that. We want people to know that. But they really are not going to think of us actively until they flip the switch and the light's not on. So for us, it's that balance. It's awareness and engagement. Certainly, when they need to reach us, we need to be there and answer them.
How about you, Mark? Can you weigh on that too?
Yeah, so I think the point that I wanted to raise on monitoring is that, if you're not going to pull out insights from that inform what your engagement strategies are or your content strategies, don't bother doing it. So listening for the sake of listening is not really worth it, really. And if you're doing that and you're not seeing insights, you're not identifying influencers that you need to engage with or themes that seem to be resonating with your audiences, I think you have to relook at how your approach to listening is.
Yeah. How about if you're McDonald's and people are writing every single day about what you're doing, and tweeting and posting and.
Well, I think this goes back to the being strategic about it. So if you think about your response and when you respond, don't respond, what you look for, where you choose to get engaged in, if you think about it like a brand guide. So you know how to use your brand, you know what color is Verizon, it's this red, not this red, this font, blah, blah. So I think that the same way goes for social media. You, at the beginning, when you're engaging this, you make sure that everyone is calibrating, including senior leadership, on, okay, on these issues, serious ones we'll engage in, these we won't. This will take this tone. You know, McDonald's is a fun brand, family-oriented. We will respond this way. It would probably be different than if we were a snarkier brand. You know what I mean? So you got to keep the tone of your response in line with what's on brand too. And then I think it's a lot of it's scenario planning as well. So it's both from okay, if fun things happen and you know, I'm making this up, the Olympics are coming up and we are a sponsor and something happens, what are the things we're gonna plan just in case this happens, both positive and negative. But if we were to respond to every single meme, you can just imagine on McDonald's, I think we'd be working 38 hours a day. But I think it's just a matter of figuring out, okay, what do you respond to, what don't you, what is real, what's not, what's bubbling up, and what's a one-off. And usually if there's video, those are the ones that get the attention because that's the one, right? Video is king these days. If there's no video, then nothing happens. But if there's video, that takes off whether it's true or not.
On the subject of monitoring, everyone has talked about, you know, having that room full of screens and watching external sentiment, watching what's coming in from your outside stakeholders. Mm-hmm. But you also can't overlook your internal information flows. You know, GM is a case in point. I would say that GM would not be in the mess it is in now if it had a more risk-sensitive culture where people internally were sensitive to what's going on in the organization and externally and felt empowered and equipped to sound the alarm when something happens. You know, it's great to have a room full of people watching monitors and monitoring social, but if you have your whole workforce sensitive to the importance of reputation and not allowing it to be damaged, where, you know, they feel it is their job to sound the alarm when there's a problem, that is absolutely key. And if you were to have looked at GM from above, there were smoldering fires all over the place. Mm-hmm. But because they were in silos, and Mary Barra has talked about this, because they were all in silos, nobody was seeing or connecting the dots to what else was happening in the organization, because nobody had all of the information. So knocking down those silos, creating you know, what I call a risk-sensitive culture, where you're getting, you know, and some organizations communicate internally through Yammer, other internal social systems. That can also be a great source of insight into what people are feeling, thinking, doing, seeing in their everyday jobs that they may not be communicating outside of their own groups.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I would just sort of build on that in a different capacity. So less about reputation, more about proactive brand communication, right? So I've seen a lot in the pharmaceutical space where you know, social listening analysis is being done by product communicators, maybe with some input from brand teams. But there's a whole other group within the brand team looking at market research, and the two sides are not connected at all. And I think the brands that are doing a better job at that are making that connection and, you know, really pulling through insights from across all their research, not just in a bubble.
Yeah, and that, you know, gaining all your intelligence is gathering it, but then coming together to make sure that it's strategic to make you go forward. And that's, you know, for years in public relations, we've wanted more data. We've wanted more of the breadcrumbs to tell us sort of where we go. And now that we're inundated with it, how are we making sense of it? And, you know, I hear a lot of PR professionals that are sort of overwhelmed by it, and they start saying, I don't know, all this data, it freaks me out. I'm like, don't ever say that. It's like, don't ever say you don't like math as a PR person, because it's all about analyzing the data, getting out some really good stats, and then making decisions based on that. So you're right. I guess one of the misconceptions in social that now you're just going to look at that and then you're not going to connect the dots back. Don't say that.
But I'd like to pick up on one point that Cheryl made, right? So it's about being strategic and thinking about what are the goals that you really need? What are the priorities for you? So what are your business goals? Mm-hmm. And the other thing I would say we need to stop and look at as communicators, there was some interesting research that came out of Stanford recently. It said different parts of the brain are activated when we want to understand something and really internalize it, and when we want to share it. And so I think that plays into it as well, right? So what are your business goals? And then what do you want the audience to do with that information? And are you helping them arrive there, right? Or are you actually helping them do something else? And so I go back to one example, and some of the team members are here. When we launched Fios mobile app, lets you watch TV outside of your home, we were very intentional about what media we picked, right? Because we wanted it to be shared, right? And success there wasn't measured by views or comments and mentions and all that. All that stuff is very important, and we need to keep an eye on that. But it was measured by downloads. Were we driving downloads? And we had the good fortune of being a couple of weeks out of marketing, so we were able to watch that and say, okay, great. We're actually driving 17,000 plus downloads a day. And I think that, it was authentic to what we were doing, which is trying to entertain people. And then we figured, all right, what are we asking people to do? We're actually asking them to take an action. So where do we need to be to have that action take place?
But just back to your point, I think at the end of the day, for communications, PR people, it's remembering that we're part of the business. So it's what is the objective. It's great to be engaged in social, but again, you need to keep in mind or remember at the end of the day, what is the clear objective you're trying to achieve? So is it brand reputation? At the end of the day, we want more people to go to McDonald's, and we don't want them to see the meme and be like, oh, I'm not going there. So it's, at the end of the day, the end result is we want customers to like us, so they go to us. Or they feel good about the brand, so they don't want to, you know what I mean? So it's, again, remembering, yes, social is great, create relationships, but the end goal is so that they can be repeat customers and tell more people about us.
If we switch over a little to sort of the last thing we're going to talk about before we go for questions from you folks is how do we manage social crises? And one of the things that we'd love to all do as professional communicators is manage it before it sort of is out there and really nutty. So maybe if you can all think of a situation maybe or a story, or whether it's your own organizations or another, where this was really managed well. I kind of said that with the NYPD. I think it kind of just knocked it down, saying, yeah, whatever, we're still here, we're going to move through this. But are there organizations, maybe John, you can talk about that, and Trish, where the fire, something was brewing and then they got a handle on it? And again, a social situation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to chat.
Okay.
I think one thing that I've recognized time and again is that first you have to, if somebody comes forward and says, oh my God, there was a negative tweet. And it's like, okay, well, let's take a step back. Like, who said it? How many people follow them? 5. Okay, that's not such a big deal. Okay, so let's sort of approach it with that mindset. But we've had an experience where there is some negative sentiment around a product, and what we've done is to really understand that full conversation, look at who is driving it, and it turns out that it's a handful of people that are just very consistent Twitter users, and so what we've done is to go and engage with them and say, came across your profile, please give us a call. We want to talk about your issues. We've had conversations, and they've since gone away. So, that's something that we're starting to do more of.
I think a great example of an organization finding itself immersed in what had been a smoldering crisis and then very elegantly kind of getting itself away from it is the NFL debacle of the last few weeks and Verizon's response. Which I think was masterful, because instead of getting down and scrapping around with all of the other sponsors who were talking about, well, are we going to pull advertising, are we not going to pull advertising, and justifying that decision one way or another, Verizon changed the dialogue, and that is it knew it had a leadership position and had the courage of its convictions to just speak out and say, look, that's not the issue. Sponsorships are not the issue. The issue here is domestic violence. And Lowell McAdams' LinkedIn letter made that point very clearly, and the punchline was, if we do right by our stakeholders and right by society, reputation will take care of itself. And that was absolutely right. I think the fact that they used LinkedIn to do that was also a good decision. It would not have been, because it was authentically coming from the CEO. Had it been a Twitter link, and I'm sure this was done, if it was just a Twitter link to a statement on the website, would have lost all of its, or a significant amount of its power and its authenticity.
So,
and I'm not just saying that to get out of a 2-year contract.
So everyone thinks reputation management is this big, amorphous, corporate speaky word. At McDonald's, its brand reputation is truth is at the front counter. You come in, it's your experience, and that's the brand reputation right there at that moment of truth, the crew person. So what McDonald's has been doing it for a while, it's responding to direct message or tweets or Foursquare check-ins on something that was wrong, and the restaurant owner or the manager will respond right back. Sorry about, saw that you didn't have a great experience, and what can I do to fix it? So it's, yes, we do a lot of things brand reputation up here, but really, grassroots brand reputation is a great way to use social media as well. That's how we've been using it.
So can I just ask, because that's really, really interesting. So how does this, you said the store manager is the one that responds. Mm-hmm. How does that happen? Because they're busy running a store, right?
So
I'm just curious.
we're monitoring. So
Okay.
we have so McDonald's is in my region, so I'm in the New York metro region, so we have the Twitter handle. So if people, or check the Foursquares, if people use the McDonald's New York Tri-State, mm-hmm. and we monitor it, someone had a bad experience at whatever restaurant, we find out who the owner is, and we'll contact the store and say, awesome. You know what, someone had a bad experience, what happened, blah, 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 you know what? We'll send them via our guest card or respond right away. And just that, and it's for anyone, and I think that's what we have to remember, that this is real life stuff. So how would you want to be treated? If someone calls me and said, that response of, wow, I had a bad experience, you noticed, that speaks volumes versus all the other things that we do. That personal touch, again, at the end of the day, it's that personal touch, that personal relationship.
Yeah, that's great.
And if social can be the conduit to that, again, what's the end goal? The end goal isn't let's be on social. The end goal is let's create the relationship, and the social leads to that personal touch.
Yeah.
That's insight, right? That's what you were talking about.
Yeah, there's a great example from Kimpton Hotels where through their listening, there was a woman who checked into her hotel and tweeted a picture of the room and said, I love my room. Too bad I don't feel great today. And a couple hours later, they show up with a bowl of soup and some stuff for her. And it's like, she's gonna love them forever.
Right, and repeat that story.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like the Disney-esque, right? Everyone loves Disney, everyone has a Disney story. Even if you have something bad, you will tell that story, but it's word of mouth. At the end of the day, digital or social is just accelerating that word of mouth. It's another word of mouth vehicle.
Right. How about scenario planning, Tricia? Do you plan for all hell breaking loose?
We do, and it has. No, we do. Social is involved in our storm drills. So during good weather, we prepare for what if. We also, on the other sides of our business, we operate nuclear plants, and so we're involved in the preparation, the storm drill, the drills in case there's an incident at one of those plants. So yeah, it's been a big culture change, I think, for our companies. Probably there's a lot of companies, but slowly, I think the social team is really becoming integrated, and people are realizing that is a very important part of all of our crisis planning. We're also, integrated in with the external communications team. So, as you were saying, we've got the boots on the ground. We've got people in all of our regions who know what events are happening when and where. So. We're in on the ground floor when we hear that there's a potential issue somewhere, anywhere.
It's very cool as the integration of social to inform the boots on the ground that, it's added a layer of insight if we pay attention to it, but you still need all the traditional stuff, maybe even becoming more important because you know more. So when you know better, you do better kind of thing, hopefully. And so hopefully we're getting the insights and then moving along and doing better and avoiding crises, and then when they happen, we are prepared for them. I don't want to do all the talking here, so I know that we're going to go and ask you folks for questions. So why don't we start that now? So there's a mic out there. If you have a question for one of our panelists, raise your hand, and then we'll come over so you can ask it. She's going to go then. You can ask. Good job, Seton Hall.
Thanks. John, you had a great point about, I think as you put it, sensitizing employees to reputation. And you used the example of GM. I wondered if the others on the stage had any examples of how you do that. How do you sensitize employees to be, whether you call them ambassadors, et cetera, to really be mindful of their actions and how they can have internally and externally an impact, positive or negative, on reputation?
So I'll speak up.
Great.
So, without disclosing companies, I'll give two examples. So one is both companies in the pharmaceutical space. One identifies and recognizes their employees that are very socially active, and leverages them as ambassadors to help carry forward their brand story. Whereas another pharmaceutical company doesn't allow their employees to talk about their brand. So you can see which one is probably the better way to go.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned before, voice of the customer, we're very active. The other side of that equation is voice of the employee. And we are very, very actively monitoring what they're saying. We're encouraging them to share whether it's a good idea. And we have a powerful answers bucket where people can submit their great ideas of how to improve the business. But also we want the honest feedback. So we're just actually wrapping up an anonymous survey that we put out to all of our employees, right? We take that. And, I think I'm going to say this and get in trouble later, but we've gotten a lot of calls about, what's the show where they put the boss, Undercover CEO?
Oh, yeah.
Undercover Boss. Our goal is for our bosses to never be able to be on that show because they are front and center and very identifiable, very relatable to the frontline employees. And those kinds of conversations are very real, and you can get a lot of insight. So to your point, digital is great, and but you don't want to get lost and enamored, right, and forget what's going on inside. And I think face-to-face is the best way you can do it. It's tiresome. You got to go out and route all the time, but our executive team is out there all the time doing that. And I think that helps keep us all customer-focused. And it's a two-way conversation. You tell me what's right, what's wrong, and I'll tell you what I think is right and wrong. And we'll bring in that voice of the customer to make our point and to help you understand why we need to be doing things differently.
You need to create an environment where your employees feel empowered and encouraged to identify risks. And part of it is giving them tools to do that. We've worked with a couple of clients to put tools in place. For example, in one case, they will not fund a project above a fairly low threshold unless the plan includes a reputation risk assessment. So it is forcing, and it's a very simple process. It's a checklist. It's a series of questions that have to be answered in order for that budget to be open, that check to be written. But it forces people to think about it, and that's key. And if they're doing it there, they start to do it in their everyday decision-making with other things. And that's where, that's where the magic happens, where people say, oh, wait a second, reputation is my job. And I see something that's wrong. I may be wrong about it, but it's my job to at least raise it. And I feel if I do that, then management is going to encourage that. If I don't do that, the Warren Buffett thing, if you lose money for the firm, I'll forgive you. If you damage reputation, I'll be ruthless,
Good. Have another question? Do you have one?
Hi.
Hi.
So in the midst of this NFL crisis with domestic violence, the NFL is convening an advisory board to combat some of these issues. So my question is, I know that previously you mentioned changing the conversation. How could the NFL change this conversation, but do so on digital platforms, social media?
That's a tough one.
I think our CEO probably said it best, right? And I think what you have to do is, let me take a step back, and let me not talk about the NFL. So our long-term commitment to domestic violence started because we saw it in the workplace. And we decided to take a step forward. And we then started understanding more and more. And so it's almost about 20 years, right, I think, of us being engaged in this important cause. In fact, we had some nonprofits here yesterday that were engaged in that cause and helping them from a PR perspective. I think it's more about being authentic and trying to deal with the issue. And I think the communications will work itself out. I appreciate John recognizing the leadership, but that leadership didn't come because we were focused on the PR. That leadership came from us actively being involved and figuring how can we make a dent, first of all, in our own house, and then how can we help others outside of our house. And so I think that's important. If you start from the communications end, you could very easily fall into a trap that you don't want to find yourself in.
But I think another thing, too, is we live in a 30-second, 2-second news cycle. So how long is domestic violence going to be the topic of the day? So it will be incumbent, I would think, if we were on the team counseling them, is how do you continue to keep it top of mind? So it goes back to how do you continue to facilitate the conversation and the interest? Because before you know it, some other thing is going to happen. Domestic violence will wait. Football season will end, and then all of a sudden the issue of domestic violence will go by the wayside. So I would hope that the task force would continue to look at stats or resources or stories or people coming forward to continue the conversation and the awareness. That's what I would hope that they would do. Because again, reality, it's not that I don't think it's important. We all think it's important, but we live in a news cycle that will change just like that. And we'll be on to the next topic of the day.
Thanks. Hi. I have a question on the listening side. For companies that are small and don't have teams in rooms watching screens and a lot of resources, any suggestions for some of the best tools for monitoring without a lot of people or budget?
Go ahead.
So going back to, so we call it local store marketing. So it depends on how big the organization is or if you're a mom and pop pizza store, right? So just using something as simple as Foursquare and okay, this is the channel I'm gonna focus on, I'm gonna look just at this, and encouraging people when they come into the restaurant to check in on Foursquare, and if you have anything to say, or good or bad, here's the venue when they check in. So you can control the social media monitoring by communicating, okay, this is the venue, you walk into the location, there's Foursquare, and then you'll be able to see all the comments that come in. So yes, we have behemoth monitoring systems and all these people, but I think someone as easy as the corner store or your local church or school can monitor social media if they are very specific and focused on the vehicle that they're encouraging people to go on, and they look at that and get people trained on responding to that medium.
Yeah, I think to that point, prioritizing your channels, right? So don't feel like you have to look at everything. Which tends to be, people tend to go that way sometimes, and really focus on, okay, where are conversations around our brand happening, and that will be like the 1 or 1-2 places where we're going to be.
And actually, the smaller the organization that I've seen is the more they want to just embrace get on every platform. And you have to tell them we're going to get the platform that's most strategic. It can't be everywhere. And I've seen when counseling some smaller firms, they don't want to give up. Like, we just got on Pinterest. I'm like, well, you have nothing to pin. Right. So maybe we should use something else. So, but telling them about they have nothing to pin, but strategically leading it back to what it means to the brand and the crises. So where does it make most sense? Because if you're everywhere, you don't have a staff to monitor. But it really is what's strategic and then monitoring. Tricia, you were going to add to that too.
Yeah, just that there are some free versions of some of the tools that we use. We use the enterprise version of Hootsuite currently, but there's a free version that I think smaller companies could use quite successfully from monitoring Twitter accounts and just watching the feed come through. And it doesn't have to be constant, you don't have to be glued to the screen, but having that there, it's a good tool.
Good morning. I wanted to speak to all of you about issues crossing borders. We see it with, obviously, Ebola and some other things. I work for a small organization where everyone has a lot of interaction. A real-life example, we represent the mining industry, copper mining. There's an issue in Mexico where there was an environmental impact in one of the mines. Because the water supply was impacted, the issue has now crossed over the border into the United States. To that point, in Mexico, the government was involved, the organization was involved, and because of the culture, people seem to be more accepting of the decisions that were made. But now we're in the US. Do you have any real-life examples or what you would do when something is a non-issue in one place and now becomes an issue in a secondary location?
So, McDonald's. So in the UK, in Canada, and actually it's everywhere, everyone thinks, our food is not real, all this stuff happens, right? You can look online right now. I did it before I came in here just so I knew it was the up-to-date on the most recent meme about what's in our food and what's not in our food. So Canada did this great program about your questions are, our answers. So they asked consumers every single thing. You ask us anything. There was no question that was left off the table to ask. Pink slime, whatever you want. You can look it up. I'm not going to repeat it. I'm on camera here. But you can look it up. So I think China, right, Japan, there are all these things that happen in stories about our products, whether something tainted, whatever it is. We leverage the stories that are online to help correct or debunk myths that exist. So McDonald's is a global company, but at the end of the day, go back to the front counter. If I hear something going on in China or I hear something happened in the UK, like, oh my God, is that in my Wayne, New Jersey McDonald's? So again, it's leveraging social media to communicate, or if you hear things bubbling up on what people are thinking about or hearing about in McDonald's and other places, and that's any brand. I think the thing that social, I guess the point is, there's this convergence, right? So news in Japan doesn't just stay in Japan. It trickles over here because we have to feed, you said it, feed this beast of online content. I think I speak more with bloggers and online media than I do with traditional media. And actually, it's the USA Online folks that you're speaking to more because they have constant, constant need to feed the beast. So again, going back to I hope I helped you. I think it's just a matter of if something happens in one area, we just leverage the assets that we have of debunking the myths. We have, about McDonald's.com and nutrition that, okay, we have all the statements that ever existed on anything, any questions they have. We stole, we took it from Canada and said, okay, that's applicable here. And I think it's just a matter of sharing resources and being proactive about it.
We have an example with Fukushima disaster. FirstEnergy Corp operates nuclear plants in Ohio, and obviously there were a lot of questions about the safety of nuclear power in the wake of that. And what we've found is utilizing third-party sources, coming from us, it's not going to be as credible as if we have other government experts, other experts in the industry, news media reporting how our plants are different than the affected plants in Japan. So that's been extremely effective in helping to calm some of those fears. Obviously, there are still strong feelings about nuclear power, but not presenting it from us, but as from others. And the other thing that we were able to do in that situation is to send our experts to Japan to help with understanding what went wrong, establishing best practices going forward, addressing those. So getting involved in it as an expert who's trying to help, I think has also been valuable to us.
If you have an issue among countries that have different regulatory schemes and different regulatory expectations, trying your best to manage that issue in accordance with the most rigorous regulatory standard of whatever country it is you operate in. Because it's one thing to say, okay, we have followed the letter of Mexican law, but if your shareholders in the US are holding you to a higher EPA standard, that is still a problem. So yes, is there an expense? Is there a potential liability even in applying US law if it is stricter to address the situation in Mexico? Yeah, it is, but it also accrues to your reputation because you're seen as taking the high ground and doing the right thing.
Yep.
Is there another question?
Thanks to the panel for sharing some great insights. My question is around Facebook and Twitter's recent announcement of the new buy button. I'm just curious to hear your take on what that means for brands in terms of conversions and kind of tweaking your content strategy.
Not one I'm too conversant in, to be honest with you, but I think we really just need to be open to exploring, but again, staying focused on who your target audiences are, what the buying behavior is. We're a little different in that we have a different relationship with our customers than somebody who's buying a hat or a shirt, where it's a little bit more transactional, right? We have, I think, a deeper relationship with our customer base. So, yeah, I don't think I have a valid point of view or a valuable point of view for you on that one.
But I think we just go back to that brand guide or how you're going to use social? Is it going back to the original strategy and the original mission? Because technology and social media and all the buttons and all the bells and whistles are going to continue to evolve. It's just a matter of figuring out, okay, let's take a breath. Are we going to react to every single shiny new penny that's out there?
Yeah.
Or are we going to stick to the screens of, okay, does that fit? Or is that the shiny penny of the day? Or does that fit with what we want to accomplish?
And it all goes back to strategy, right? And what your brand messaging are and what you really want to engage on and what you choose not to engage on. I keep telling clients too is that these are our social topics and this is what we talk about and this is what we can talk about and this is what we don't talk about. So sometimes you're going to get pulled into some conversations, but you really want to make sure that this is what you're an expert on and we're not an expert on some of these other things that some people are trying to pull us in on, and then you're transparent about that.
Yeah, and I think you still have to have a healthy sense of exploration and curiosity, right? So I think of Fidelity, for example, and you mentioned Pinterest, and whenever I hear Pinterest, I think of Fidelity, and I'll tell you why. They had a very cool case study where they used Pinterest to engage in a conversation about 529 plans. Finance and Pinterest, right? You would never think that those two match together, but they actually made it work, right? Because who cares about kids' college? Moms, right? So it was a perfect, and I think if they lacked that sense of curiosity, then there might be an issue, right? But they had both a sense of curiosity, they knew what their strategy was, they knew who their audiences were, and that's why they were able to make use of it. So it's got to be healthy of, listen, we're not going to react to everything, but there are some things we should be curious about, let's look into it. So you got me curious, I'm going to look into it.
Well, no, I think it's a good, again, goes back to strategy and, ask yourself, why are we going to do this and how are we going to do it in the long term? Are we going to have resources to maintain it? We see brands that get into Pinterest or want to be on Twitter, but then they don't sustain it. And it just creates this content dump on the internet that, is a waste of time.
Any other questions? Doug?
These days, when we talk about social, things can get started on social. A torn sweatshirt can wind up screwing up a clothing distributor's reputation, or poor hygiene in a restaurant. But a lot of these things wind up gaining a lot of public attention when they get out of social and go on to traditional media. When do you make the decision to take something that's brewing on social, that's stayed on social so far? I guess the question is, when do you make the decision to take it into other media, to broaden the discussion, to get in front of an issue?
I'll start. I think we've experienced that on the issues side where we've engaged in an issue related to a product online, as I referenced earlier. And then when we've talked to media, traditional media after that, whether it's proactive outreach or responding to an inquiry, we tell them what we're doing social. So we say, yeah, we've heard those people and we're engaging with them and we're having conversations and we're trying to settle their concerns.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So, I liken it to crossing the street, right? That's when you're crossing the street, if it's all quiet, you're good, you look both ways, everything's great. But if you start hearing noise and something's coming at you quick, it's volume and speed, right? What is this volume and speed at which you're seeing that issue spike? But some of it also is judgment. I think as communicators, you got to have the core skills, right? You got to know how to write, you have to learn how to research, you need people skills like that. But I think one of the greatest assets we have as communicators that we bring to a company is judgment. And I think, John, you alluded to that earlier, right? And really sitting down and understanding the issue and saying, all right, and being flexible too, right? Because you may be at one juncture at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a very different juncture at 6 p.m. And so there's a little bit of flexibility baked in. But I do think at the end of the day, it's a judgment call, and you just have to be on top of it, basically.
I think it's
You really need to think about reputation holistically. There's no such thing as managing your online reputation and, okay, now I'm going to manage my offline reputation. It's reputation. And if you have an opportunity, we encourage clients, view every crisis, every issue as an opportunity not just to contain the issue, but to demonstrate leadership. Verizon, again, good example. if you are doing that, use all available media. If you have that position, because things are going to propagate whether you want them or not, whether you want them to or not. You have no control over that. So if you have a story to tell it wherever you can. The old thing about limiting your response to exactly the medium where it happened no longer holds.
Yeah. I think that the ALF and the ice bucket is a classic example of that, right? So where it didn't start with them, but suddenly they realized they were in a position where they had to have a story around this and communicate it through traditional and social.
But I think going back to the question, I think it's going back to judgment and using our traditional response to how we would handle a crisis. So if something negative has happened, you have a plan in place, or you figure, okay, if this gets out, or if the media start asking about it, then you'd respond. I don't think you'd proactively go and say, okay, here's what's on social, here's our response to it. People start asking, then you have a response if you're asked. I think that's where it would accelerate, but that would be if it happened and it wasn't on social channels. On the flip side, where you can be proactive, if people are using social channels to put your brand in a positive light. So if kids are having fun at McDonald's or a couple got married at McDonald's, that's the content that maybe you want to proactively put out there. But you would do that if you heard about it. If it wasn't in social media, you just heard, if someone got married, you'd proactively pitch that out. So I think the response to social media and the content you get there is really the same response or the same reaction you'd have if social was not involved at all and you learned about it.
Do we have time for one more question?
Hi. So for brands like GM, who may be losing trust in their stakeholders and in their shareholders, what do you think is the most effective strategy in engaging them back into the conversation while also gaining their trust back?
It is going to be a long, long road for GM, and I think people are going to have to win back. The CEO is going to have to win back trust in how she's managing the business. They're going to have to show very real change in their culture, and not only talk about it, but demonstrate over time that it is working. Going back to it, continually showing this is what we said we needed to do. Right. This is what we have done. And this is how it is working. This is how it is benefiting consumers. This is how it's benefiting the product. This is how it's benefiting the economy in which we operate. And that's going to be a very long battle. The shame of it is, the situation that has happened to GM happened 14 years ago in the Ford Firestone debacle. It is exactly the same cultural issue. They could have learned from it, and they didn't. And they didn't. And I think it was very telling. Somebody took the 2x4 upside the head and said, wait a second, we've seen this before when they brought in Jeff Eller onto their crisis team because he managed the Ford Firestone debacle. So learning and showing that you've learned from what's happened is going to be critical as well.
But I would hope that, so we're all focused on primarily, usually, what customers are saying, what the external audiences are seeing. Whenever there's a crisis or an issue of brand reputation, unfortunately, our internal customers, I think we're talking about, take a back seat. And it really should be on both. Customers are our customers, both internal, external. Because when your folks leave your office or leave your location, what are they saying about you too? So that is also a big part of your reputation. Yes, you want your customers and external holders and stakeholders and all those folks to know positive things about you. But if your internal customers, the people who are working and living and breathing your brand for you every single day, if they're not feeling it first, all you say externally won't be authentic and it won't live on.
Well, I'm told we have time for 2 more questions, so we'll take those 2 in the front.
Hi. So you were talking earlier about streamlining channels, especially on a shoestring budget. but when it comes to social, I notice a lot of companies have multiple Twitter handles, for example, some for their customer service, some for the mainstream news feed that takes a more positive tone. Do you find that's useful to divide even an individual channel into different handles to control the conversation, control the tone for each of those handles? And does that help with reputation management and crisis control, or does it tend to muddy the waters in the conversation?
Personally, I think it muddies the waters. We do have, in my group, 10 social media accounts, or excuse me, 10 Twitter accounts, but that's for each of our operating companies. So JCP&L customers have one Twitter account, and I think it's cleaner. I think that we're communicating to the same group of customers, whether we're talking about some charity event that we support in the community, or strengthening a circuit that's been causing problems, or answering a customer query. We want to make it easy for customers to find us and not have to feel, well, is this one or this one, this one. So for us, it's been, I think, a much better experience for us and for our customers to keep it on one channel.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be a panel if you didn't have opposing views. So I'm going to give you an opposing view a little bit here. So we have different channels, right? And the goal is, and in the beginning I would say, so I'll give you at Verizon, for example, and then we have a couple of support handles. We have great customer care teams who are constantly retooling what they do and improving how they're reaching out to customers. And so are we. So, when you think about a company like ours, we have tens of millions of contacts with customers every day, right? It's very hard to have it all in one place. It's a lot better if you can have specialized teams, right? So I think it depends on your scenario. So for us, we need to have different structures going on. Having said that, though, what we try to do is try to make it seamless for the customer. So if a customer says, hey, at Verizon, I have a problem with XYZ, behind the scenes, we should be facilitating that conversation for the right channel to come back and respond and help, right? Versus saying, hey, go wrong channel, go over there. That's not what we want to do. And by the way, we learned that the hard way, right? That's okay. We learned, we improved, constantly improving. And I think the other thing I'll say is, we have a credo at Verizon, and one of the things that, one of the most popular lines, I think, is we have work because of our customers. And I think we should be looking, I know we as a company, we look at that as a cultural touchstone. Particularly, I would say the communications team takes that very seriously. And if we see something, we not only say something, we often engage, right? And sometimes it's influencer-based, but mostly not. It's really about, you have an issue, and I want to solve your issue for you. And that's the kind of culture we want to create. So it almost becomes, there are a bunch of channels, but there's really no one-size-fits-all. It's everybody's responsibility, and we should all dig in.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I would say, too, that two things. One is that you can't put the onus on the stakeholder, customer, to know which channel or which handle to respond to. We experienced this at Bayer, where at Bayer is managed out of Germany. So, people in the U.S. constantly tweet at Bayer, and then it actually ends up through an email coming back to somebody in the U.S. to handle it. So, that's one thing. The other thing is, to your point, we need to have multiple channels. So not only from that example of a global company recognizing that social has no borders, right? So we need to have a Bayer US handle separate from Bayer, but we also need, because we have a diverse business, we need to have handles that are looking just at crop science, handles that look at pharma, and separate those out, because those pieces of content are so different that it's maybe a distraction or a turnoff to a customer to be seeing things that they don't care about.
Last question.
This is kind of specific to what you were just talking about for the pharma handles, and probably specific to the healthcare industry, is with so much regulatory and compliance about how you go about your social media strategy and responding to people in real time when there's so much regulation around what you can say.
Yeah, it's certainly not easy. It is heavily regulated. And there are various things you can do. So for example, just pharma product example, a brand that wants to do listening, but is fearful that they might have to report adverse events, right? And then that puts a burden on the pharmacovigilance team to be able to manage that process. give an example of a brand that started that last summer, suddenly inundated the pharmacovigilance team with hundreds of adverse events. And by the way, they have 24 hours to report that to the FDA. So instead, what they do now is they do a sample. So instead of looking at all the tweets in a week, they look at 100 tweets. And that gives them some directional guidance in terms of conversation, but it really helps manage that process. So that's one example.